How much should we train? Is there an amount of exercise that can harm your health? Of course there is. And in this video, we're going to look at how much we should train so we don't hurt ourselves. How many times a week does it make sense to do a muscle workout, and how to take advantage of the best tips science can give us to speed up our recovery and not hurt ourselves. If we want to know how much to train for results and how much training is too much, the first thing we need to do is ask ourselves if we are recovering enough after training to really understand when we are generating more harm than benefit from training. We need to understand what our recovery capacity is and what that capacity depends on. If we recover poorly and overtrain, we're not going to get results, we're not going to build our muscles, or we're not going to improve our running time. And the reality is that many times people overtrain. So let's look at what factors affect the speed of your recovery so you can recover faster and get more results when you train. First of all, there is sleep. People forget that muscle development does not happen when we are lifting a weight. It does not happen when we are working the muscle. It really happens when the training period is over and our body understands that it has to go into anabolism as an adaptation to that effort. I'm done training, I'm resting, and I get my energy back. And now my body can devote that energy to building muscle. The main process of muscle building happens during sleep. If you have insomnia, if you have high levels of stress and cortisol that affect your sleep quality, you're going to decrease not only your muscle development, but your ability to recover. And you're going to have to wait longer between workouts to avoid injury. Therefore, improve your sleep quality in order to accelerate the rate at which your body builds new tissue, builds muscle mass, and the rate at which your body recovers. Secondly, we have nutrition. What percentage of carbohydrates, protein, and fat are you consuming? The most important thing is that, after training, if you were trying to build muscle mass, paradoxically, you put some of the carbohydrates you used, otherwise you are not going to have energy to train again. And that you consume the amount of protein for your body to build new tissues. And obviously, there are going to be supplements that accelerate the speed of recovery of our body because they have to do with giving us more energy, with giving us the raw material that our muscles need to rebuild. And all these supplements are effectively going to allow me to train more often with less risk of injury and with more ease for my body to build new tissue. That's basically going to be the essential amino acids that provide the raw material for my body to build different tissues. The branched chain amino acids are the specific amino acids that my muscle needs to build tissues. That is leucine, isoleucine, and valine, primarily. Of the three, leucine being the most important, they give me the ability to have the raw material I need to build contractile tissue, to build muscle. And on the other hand, we have supplements such as creatine that do not really provide us with raw material, but rather provide us with more energy at a muscular level. So, it accelerates the rate at which my body can build new tissue and the rate at which it recovers between workouts. So, if I use creatine or if I use essential amino acids, I can shorten the time I rest between workouts. The first week of training, 80 to 90% of new protein synthesis is for damage repair. So don't stand in front of the mirror looking at yourself and looking for a result. But luckily, by the third to fourth week, only 10% of this protein synthesis is used to repair tissue. The rest generates new tissue, generates new muscle. That's why muscle growth starts to be noticeable in the fourth week. So, don't believe everything you see on the internet when they promise you that in 4 weeks you can have a great set of abs. And we maximize our muscle hypertrophy at approximately 10 weeks. That means that if I have consistency for 10 weeks, it starts to optimize my body to build new tissue, to build new muscle. That's where I'm really going to start noticing results. And why is this important for this recovery? Because someone who trains little, no matter if we are talking about muscular or aerobic training, needs more rest and recovery than someone who is trained. So, at the beginning of your training, don't overdo it. Rest at least 2 days per week. And to understand how much to train, you have to think about your goal first. If your goal is to increase muscular strength, the training itself dictates how much is enough. When we want to gain strength, we need to work in sets of 3 to 6 reps with 80 to 90% of the total weight we can lift. What does this mean? That if I want to train chest, the most I can lift at one time is 100 kilograms. If I want to strength train, I'm going to have to use 80 to 90 kilos. So, in this situation, answering the question of how much training is too much is very simple. Adjust to the number of sets I can train with that criteria in mind. If I can't complete a set of 3 to 6 reps with the weight I normally use for strength after I've had the correct amount of rest, which in strength is usually about 2 minutes or more, I've reached my limit. It doesn't do me any good to overdo it because it won't give me more strength. So, it is very simple to determine how much training is enough. But when we think about volume and hypertrophy, the exercise limit becomes a much more complex and variable incognita, because there is no exact number. Because the harder we train, that is, the closer to our limit we train, the fewer sets or less weekly exercise we need to obtain muscle development. The concept is simple. The less time you want to dedicate to your training, the more intense the rate of perceived exertion you will have to train, and the less reserve in the tank you may have left when you finish training. But then, the question is, how much rest do I have to take between workouts, and how much is too much training to the point of hurting my results and making me lose muscle development? This depends on several things. First, as I mentioned before, it depends on your level of experience and continuity. If you are just starting out, you need more rest, and no one in their right mind is going to recommend that you train 6 times a week under these circumstances, whereas a person who has been training for years can afford to train 5 or 6 times a week. On the other hand, you have to consider how hard you train. The closer to your limit you train, the more you will have to rest after that workout. In fact, if you train with a perceived exertion rating of 9 out of 10, you're going to have to rest at least 48 hours before training the same muscle group. Whereas if you train with a perceived exertion rating of 7 out of 10, you could train much more frequently. And does the type of exercise you do impact how long you need to recover? Of course it does. Compound exercises, such as those used for strength training, typically deadlifts, squats, or large muscle group exercises, are going to be more demanding on your body than the same amount of exercise but smaller joints, such as biceps. So, in the same way that in strength exercises you need more rest to recover, in large compound exercises you also need more rest than if you train only arms one day. With all this information, what do you have to do? If you are a beginner, over 50 years old, or you had an injury from which you are not recovering, in the first 3 weeks of training, rest at least 72 hours per muscle group. In that case, what I recommend is a routine divided in 2 types A and B. It can be 1 day of upper body exercises and another day of lower body exercises, and alternate them so as not to train one muscle group every less than 72 hours. You can even train up to 4 times a week at most, doing an ABB type routine. Then, once you have reached a good level of training, you can train each muscle group every 48 hours. So, if you want to speed up your muscle recovery to train more often and not get injured, I recommend you to use essential amino acids after training. Finally, a small comment must be made about aerobic exercise. When we talk about aerobic endurance rather than anaerobic endurance, what changes is that aerobic endurance relies more on the ability of your muscles to use oxygen, while anaerobic endurance relies more on the ability of your muscles to generate energy without oxygen. Generally speaking, aerobic endurance training, which is for improving cardiovascular fitness, is much less demanding in terms of the damage it does to your muscles than anaerobic, or weight, training. So you can train more frequently without risk of injury. The scientific literature generally recommends training aerobic endurance 3 to 5 times per week, but it depends on how hard you train and how close to the limit of perceived exertion you train. If you don't feel like you've trained hard, that is, you didn't reach that 7 out of 10 perceived exertion, you could train even every day, but in general, 3 times a week is more than enough. Before we go, I want to ask you, please, if you like these videos, share them with all your contacts, and please also leave us a like to improve the algorithm so that more people can find this content. Remember to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell. Thank you in advance for your generosity, and see you next time.